Hello, class. Let's talk about the second afternoon in John Perry's dialogue on good, evil, and the existence of God. Here are some study guide questions to help us get started. 1. How does Miller's theodicy account for natural evils? 2. How could Weirob have appealed to causation as an objection to theological evils? 3. How could Weirob have appealed to universal salvation as an objection to theological evils? 4. How could Weirob have appealed to the difference between will and action as an objection to Miller's theodicy? 5. What is supervenience? 6. What is Weirob's view on good and evil? Alright, as always, when I go through the answers to these study guide questions, you'll want to take notes, write things down, type them up, or crochet them into a sweater in order to better remember the information. So when we last left off, we were worrying about a natural evil. Miller had presented a theodicy, that is, an attempt to answer the problem of evil, by talking about free will. Miller claimed that free will is better than the lack of it, and so an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God would create free-willed creatures. However, free-willed creatures can do evil. Thus, we have a situation where, despite being all-knowing, all-powerful, and morally good, God can exist with evil, as long as the evil is caused by free-willed beings. This brings us to the problem of natural evil. Natural evils are evils that aren't caused by any intent or by any agent. Weirob's example was a cute little baby bat falling from the roof of a cave into some guano and getting devoured by carnivorous cockroaches. But you can consider earthquakes, tsunamis, natural disasters, diseases, and other such examples too. So right out of the gate, Miller makes a rather extreme move. He asks Weirob whether it's impossible that God should have created other free-willed creatures besides human beings. Thinking that he means dolphins or great apes, Weirob admits that surely that's possible. But Miller clarifies that he doesn't mean other animals. He means other free-willed creatures which are a little bit more supernatural, a little bit more theological, a little bit more like God himself, somewhere in between us and God. Weirob balks, asking surely Miller doesn't mean angels, does he? And indeed he does. Miller proposes the following. Perhaps there are supernatural persons, call them angels, immaterial persons. Persons, that is, creatures who act on reasons, who can choose to do different things, and who just so happen to freely choose evil. When they do, apparently natural evils result. So in other words, Miller's solution to the problem of natural evils is this. Everything which appears to be a natural evil that has no intentional cause is actually intentionally caused by an invisible supernatural agent, an angel except for one that chooses to be evil. We might call such beings devils, but I think more appropriately we should call them theological evils. Theological evils are free-willed supernatural agents which cause the sorts of things that we would normally refer to as natural evils. So Miller's solution to the problem of natural evils is to add theological evils to his theodicy. Now at this point, Weirob is absolutely incredulous. She cannot believe that this is going to be the solution that Miller goes for. Devils, really? And Miller tries to qualify his answer and say, no, he doesn't mean like little red humanoids with pitchforks and horns and tails or anything like that. He just means free-willed creatures like us who are a bit more supernatural than us. And while Weirob digs in her heels and shows a lot of incredulity, she unfortunately doesn't provide many arguments against theological evils. So let's provide a couple which she should have, or could have at least. First, let's talk about causation. Here's an argument which Weirob could have made against Miller's appeal to theological evils. First, if Miller's theodicy is correct, then whether an event is physically caused depends on its moral quality. But second, whether an event is physically caused does not depend on its moral quality. So, Miller's theodicy is not correct. Let's explain this argument. Consider a tsunami. You'd think that a tsunami is a physical event with physical causes. You'd think that those causes could be studied by meteorologists and that the tsunami, in a sense, could be predicted and measured. Indeed, based on everything we know about tsunamis, it seems that a tsunami's occurrence is entirely settled by physical factors. But if Miller's theodicy is correct, that's not true. In fact, according to Miller's theodicy, God wouldn't just allow a tsunami to happen. No. In order for a tsunami to happen, it has to have, in addition to physical causes, an immaterial, supernatural, miraculous cause. Something that cannot be physically detected, physically measured, or physically predicted. You can only tell that it had a supernatural cause because the tsunami was bad. That's rather strange. Imagine two tsunamis, exactly alike except for that one of them doesn't cause any actual harm or evil to anyone. If Miller's theodicy is true, then the harmless tsunami is caused entirely by physics. But the harmful tsunami is caused by a devil. Why? Because the harmful tsunami was harmful. That's just weird. A second sort of objection, which Weirob could have pressed to Miller but didn't, concerns this idea of universal salvation, and it trades on this point that, according to Miller's theodicy, the supernatural beings that cause apparently natural evils are free-willed. Here's how the argument goes. First, if Miller's theodicy is correct, then it's possible for intelligent, free-willed beings to refuse God's grace and forgiveness for an infinite amount of time. But second, it's not possible for intelligent, free-willed beings to refuse God's grace and forgiveness over an infinite amount of time. So, third, Miller's theodicy is not correct. Now, this objection goes back to the former Christian saint turned heretic Origen. Origen argued that because God forgives, that means not just human beings will be forgiven, but anyone who seeks forgiveness will be forgiven. That includes the fallen angels, the rebellious agents of Lucifer's army. Heck, it even includes the devil himself. If only the devil himself would feel sorry and genuinely seek forgiveness, claimed Origen, then even the devil himself would be forgiven. And over an infinite amount of time, or heck, even over a very long, finite amount of time, eventually everyone is going to seek forgiveness. So based on this logic, there shouldn't be any devils. There shouldn't be any ill-willed, immortal, supernatural agents. That's another argument Weirob could have made against theological evils. And putting theological evils aside, there's another more basic objection which Weirob could have made to Miller's theodicy. This objection appeals to the difference between will and action. Let's consider a hypothetical situation. Suppose that you are put in charge of a daycare center, and you're watching over a bunch of toddlers. Because you are good and helpful, you don't force the toddlers to do any specific things. You let them sort of play and explore. In this sense, you give them free will. But what happens if a toddler grabs something sharp and then runs at another toddler? Do you just ignore it? Do you refuse to intervene because, after all, intervening would deny them their free will? No. You intervene. You take the sharp thing away. You allow the toddlers to have free will, but the one thing you deny them is free action. They can will whatever they want. They can try whatever they want. They can have all kinds of free intentions and goals and plans. It's just that because you are watchful and because you care, you won't let those toddlers come to harm as a result of those plans. Why can't God do that? This is the objection to Miller's theodicy that appeals to the difference between will and action. Let's formalize the objection as follows. First, if Miller's theodicy is correct, then there is no way for God to allow free will without also allowing the possibility of evil. But second, there is a way for God to allow for free will without allowing the possibility of evil. Just deny free action while allowing free will. So, third, Miller's theodicy is not correct. The point of the objection, of course, is to point out that God could give us free will and just make sure that we didn't come to harm. It's possible. It's a way for free will to exist without there being the potential for evil. Why not? As such, it's a rather serious objection to Miller's theodicy. But in any case, after showing some serious incredulity about theological evils, Weirob and Miller and Cohen turn to the question of what Weirob thinks about good and evil. Does she take some simplistic utilitarian view, according to which goodness is pleasure and evil is pain? Well, not quite. In order to briefly explain what Weirob's views on good and evil are, it's necessary for us to briefly discuss a concept from professional analytic philosophy which doesn't appear in the pages of Perry's dialogue. That concept is supervenience. Now, please don't let anyone trick you into thinking that the idea of supervenience is incredibly complex or mysterious or needs investigation. It's a technical notion, it's a stipulative notion, it's something that philosophers came up with in order to capture a certain idea. That's all. It's very simple. Supervenience is a relationship, and it's specifically the denial of independent variation. We say that A supervenes on B when any change in A requires a change in B. As an example, consider a tic-tac-toe board. There are 9 spaces in the tic-tac-toe board, and in any one of those spaces it can be blank, have an X, or have an O. When we take a look at the sum total of all the spaces and what occupies them, we could say that there's a certain pattern of X's and O's and blanks. Call that pattern a TT pattern. Every tic-tac-toe board has a TT pattern. Here, the TT pattern supervenes on the facts about X's, O's, and blanks. In other words, in order for there to be any change in the overall pattern of x's, o's, and blanks, there would have to be a change in which spaces had an x, an o, or a blank in them. The total pattern of x's and o's, in other words, depends on or supervenes on the individual placement of x's and o's. This allows us to say that there's nothing more to the TT pattern than a bunch of x's and o's and blanks, while at the same time not being so ambitious as to say that the pattern is a set of x's, o's, and blanks. Philosophers appeal to supervenience when they want to claim that something depends very, very strongly and closely on another thing, but they don't want to identify the two things in question. Many materialist philosophers, for instance, will say that the mind supervenes on the body, or that artistic beauty supervenes on physical characteristics of artworks. And that allows them to avoid saying, respectively, that the mind just is the body, or that artistic beauty just is the physical characteristics of artworks. Anyway, the point of mentioning this is that when Weirob brings up her views on good and evil, she says on one hand that she doesn't want to reduce good and evil to just pleasure and pain respectively, but she does think that there's a strong dependence of good and evil on the various patterns of distribution of pleasure and pain. What we should say as readers, having just become familiar with the concept of supervenience, is that, according to Weirob, good and evil supervenes on pleasure and pain. That's her view. She personally describes it in the dialogue as being a kind of Manichaeanism, but that's not nearly as accurate as just saying that, according to her, moral good and moral evil supervene on pleasure and pain. And thus our dialogue comes to an end. Weirob challenged Miller to solve the problem of evil. Miller provided a theodicy which appealed to free will as well as supernatural free-willed agents. Weirob doesn't believe one word of it, but she does, in the end, accept that it is a consistent solution. She lets Miller say a prayer for her, and the dialogue ends. So, that's our discussion of Perry's dialogue on good, evil, and the existence of God. What do you think? Do you think Miller's theodicy actually worked, or do you think one of the objections, which we explored but Weirob didn't raise, is decisive? Let me know in the comments. Thanks very much for watching, stay tuned for more philosophy of religion videos coming out this semester, and thanks again for watching.